always thought Tangled was kind of underrated. There are plenty of people that consider it to be a good film, and it was generally well received by audiences and critics. It even got its own animated series, so it's not like people didn't like it. But I never really understood why Frozen was so much more popular. And that's not an opinion that I formed recently. I always liked Tangled a lot more. It's actually one of my favorite 3D non-Pixar films. I'm mostly going to be talking about Tangled in this video, but I'm also going to talk about Inside Job a little bit, because both of these stories have a narcissist mom character, and both stories deal with emotional abuse. And I want to make a few comparisons, so spoilers for both if you haven't seen them. A drop of sunlight falls from the sky and a golden magic flower grows. It has the power to heal the sick and even infinitely restore a person's youth. Gothel, who's already very old at this point, finds the flower and uses it to stay young for hundreds of years. She looks like she's about to kick the bucket right now, so that was pretty good timing. The queen becomes pregnant, but she's sick, so everyone goes out to search for the magic flower. I do find it a bit strange how the movie immediately frames Gothel hiding the flower and using it to literally not die, as being selfish and refusing to share the flower's gift. But these royals using the flower to keep the queen alive isn't selfish. Or I guess it's only okay to be selfish if you're royalty. I guess technically Gothel keeping the flower to herself is selfish by definition, but if she's the one who found it, then isn't it hers? And she does literally need it to stay alive. When the soldiers locate the flower, they uproot the entire thing and put it in a drink, and just like that, the magical flower is gone forever. And now no one else can use it, just like no one else could use it when Gothel was hiding it. She should have just uprooted the flower herself and taken it to her home, and planted it on her own property. Then if they came onto her property and took it, that would make them thieves. But because she leaves it there, it doesn't really belong to anyone. And she's been alive for hundreds of years at this point, so you'd think that would have occurred to her. Wisdom doesn't always come with age, I guess. Rapunzel is born and the magic transfers to her hair, and when her hair is cut, the magic doesn't work anymore, so Gothel kidnaps her. This is objectively wrong because that's not her kid, but at the same time her not dying is pretty strong motivation, I guess. Now, if you thought I was going to be sympathetic towards Gothel, you're going to be disappointed, because I have zero sympathy for her. If she were kind to Rapunzel, or there was some indication that Gothel actually cared about her, then I probably would feel some sympathy. But Gothel is a narcissist, so her caring about anyone other than herself isn't in the cards for her. Gothel hides Rapunzel away in a tower determined to keep her hidden from everyone, and tells her that she can never leave because the world is full of horrible, selfish people. Yes, that's true, and there's even someone like that here right now. Rapunzel grows up alone in the tower and develops a lot of hobbies because she's not allowed to leave, and is completely isolated from other people. She does have Pascal, who is very cute, but she doesn't have any human companionship aside from her mother. When I said narcissists aren't capable of empathy in my previous videos, I was talking about emotional or affective empathy, feeling other people's emotions. That isn't the only kind of empathy that exists, though. It's just the kind that most people are familiar with. Lots of people have low emotional empathy, and there isn't anything inherently wrong with that. In fact, having too much emotional empathy can sometimes be more of a hindrance than anything.
Just today you were crying about snakes.
They don't have any arms.
There is another form of empathy, and it's called cognitive empathy, which is the ability to think critically and try to understand another person's situation. It's more rational and logical, and doesn't involve any kind of feeling or sympathy, and it's a skill that can be developed over time. The T-800 learns this form of empathy in the second Terminator film.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
He understands why John is upset, but he doesn't feel it. Data from Star Trek, an android that isn't even capable of human emotion, still has cognitive empathy.
Is it part of your program to seek out vulnerabilities in your enemies?
Yes. Are you my enemy?
I obey Fajo.
Why?
Kivas finds ways to get what he wants from his people. His rewards for loyalty are lavish. His punishments for disloyalty are equally lavish. Face it, android. He has you.
It appears he has us both.
Cognitive empathy is a very useful skill to have, and plenty of people use it in a positive way to better understand and communicate with others. But this is the only form of empathy that narcissists are capable of, and they use it as a tool only for their own advantage and benefit. In fact, their capacity for cognitive empathy is part of what makes them such expert manipulators, and it's arguably what makes their behavior cruel by definition. They're aware that they hurt their victims, they just don't care.
Ah, Rapunzel, how you manage to do that every single day without fail. It looks absolutely exhausting, darling.
Oh, it's nothing.
Then I don't know why it takes so long. Oh, darling, I'm just teasing.
Gothel says something mean to Rapunzel, gauges her reaction, sees that she's upset, and then pretends like she's teasing.
Rapunzel, look in that mirror. You know what I see? I see a strong, confident, beautiful young lady. Oh, look, you're here too. I'm just teasing. Stop taking everything so seriously.
And then when Rapunzel is trying to muster up the courage to make her birthday request, Gothel interrupts her, mocks her, and calls her mumbling annoying.
I'm just teasing. You're adorable. I love you so much, darling.
She gaslit her like 3 times within the span of 2 minutes, so this is clearly a very typical interaction between the two of them. And this has been going on for nearly 18 years at this point. The only positive I can see here is that Gothel appears to come and go a lot. She won't let Rapunzel leave, but she also doesn't seem to spend that much time with her. She kinda just pops in to restore her youth, insults her, reminds her of how scary the outside world is, drops off some food or supplies, and then leaves. And she's not interfering with Rapunzel developing all these hobbies, and expressing her individuality and independence by cultivating all these skills. She is very controlling, she's infantilizing Rapunzel, and she clearly wants her to believe that she can't take care of herself. But as long as Rapunzel doesn't leave, Gothel doesn't seem to care about what she's doing. Narcissist mothers tend to be jealous of their daughters, and that can manifest in really awful, damaging ways. But Gothel knows Rapunzel isn't actually her daughter, and I feel like that's a factor. She does insult and gaslight her a lot, but I'm not convinced she's doing that out of jealousy. There also isn't even anyone else around to compliment or be impressed with Rapunzel's beauty and or skills, and possibly cause Gothel to feel inadequate by comparison anyway. She's clearly a narcissist, but I'm not seeing every single narcissistic trait in her in spades like I did with Tomiko. I'm not seeing obvious jealousy or an excessive need for admiration or her only associating with people that are supposedly as important as she is. But Inside Job is an adult animated comedy, and they clearly wanted the audience to understand with crystal clarity that Tomiko is a huge narcissist. I mean, they checked every single box with that character. She hurts Ren every time he shows vulnerability to her, and she likes doing it. So they nailed how cruel she is. And her relationship with Reagan supposedly improves only when they're doing this absurd role reversal, where Reagan's doing all the work and acting like the mom, and Tomiko's just sucking her dry like the emotional vampire that she is. They even did the when her mask comes off and she acts crazy thing that my mom does. I have literally never seen a more accurate representation of a narcissist in a cartoon than Tomiko. She's basically narcissism the character. I just don't get the impression that the people working on Tangled were like, okay, Gothel's a narcissist, we gotta get every trait in there. I have the art book for Tangled, and they never even use the word narcissist to describe Gothel. I did read somewhere that they got a lot of input from some of the female employees. Some of the women animators talked about their complicated relationships with their mothers, and at least one of those women had to have had a narcissist for a mom. And that input that they got from that person, maybe it was more than one, I don't know, was very influential in the writer shaping Gothel's personality, because she does act a lot like a narcissist. I found this interview with the director, and he kept using the word complexity to describe Gothel, which I found a bit odd. Mother Gothel isn't obviously villainous from the start, he says. She's complex. She's not a witch and she doesn't have superpowers. What she has is her mind. She can manipulate. There's people like that in the world. She has to convince this smart girl that she is her mother. and she just intends to use this girl as long as she can. There's this complexity that exists. If she's too villainous, too obvious, she's going to get figured out. I understand what he means, but it still kinda rubs me the wrong way. I suppose Gothel could be considered complicated if you're comparing her to a mustache-twirling, one-dimensional villain that the audience immediately understands is purely evil from the start, but that's setting the bar pretty low. A victim can definitely have a complicated relationship with a narcissist, and lots of people do when they're trapped in the abusive relationship. But that's because they're being deceived and manipulated and haven't accepted that the narcissist doesn't care about them. Or maybe they've been abused so badly that they've convinced themselves that they deserve to be treated that way or something. Narcissists just by themselves are not complicated though, not when you understand how they operate. Rapunzel asks if she can leave the tower to see the lights for her birthday, and Gothel performs an entire musical number where she's belittling and insulting her. On your own you won't survive, sloppy, underdressed, immature, clumsy, gullible, naive, positively grubby, ditzy, and a bit, well, vague, plus you're getting kinda chubby. We can all see that Rapunzel isn't even remotely chubby, so this comment clearly isn't being made out of concern for her health. Why is Gothel saying it then? To hurt Rapunzel's feelings, there's no other explanation. Her behavior has nothing to do with her not understanding what she's doing. She knows how her words negatively affect Rapunzel, and that's why she does it. Shaming, guilt-tripping, and lowering Rapunzel's self-esteem and brainwashing her into believing that she can't make it on her own makes it easier for Gothel to control her. All of this is intentional and calculated. The soundtrack version of the song has some additional verses that really showcase how committed Gothel is to deeply ingraining feelings of guilt and shame into her daughter. Me, I'm just your mother, what do I know? I only bathed and changed and nursed you. Go ahead and leave me, I deserve it. Let me die alone here, be my guest. All in good time, Gothel. Rapunzel's needs and desires don't matter. All that matters is what her mother wants. And all of this circles back to how Rapunzel asserting independence by leaving to explore the outside world, and not being completely reliant on Gothel, and learning to fend for herself will hurt her mother. And this cruel, manipulative song ultimately ends with her mother saying no and don't ever ask to leave again. When Gothel returns, she says, "I hate to leave you after a fight," which almost seems like a mild admission of guilt at first. But then she continues, "especially when I've done absolutely nothing wrong." She didn't just say no to Rapunzel's request, she was insulting and shaming her throughout this entire song. So she did plenty wrong. Rapunzel tries to tell Gothel that she's strong enough to leave the tower, but Gothel won't even let her speak and yells absurdly loud, and then immediately plays the victim by acting like Rapunzel made her do it. Now I'm the bad guy, look how you've upset me. Nice performance, lady. Being an abusive jerk and refusing to apologize and then playing the victim is typical narcissistic behavior. They do this sort of thing a lot. Narcissists are so profoundly selfish that they always see every interaction they have with another person through the filter of, how does this affect me? I was actually gonna make a joke about how a narcissist could stab someone, and then they'd be like, do you have any idea how much that hurt me? And then I remembered that Gothel basically does this later in the movie. She literally stabs Flynn, and then immediately looks at Rapunzel and is like, look what you did. I shouldn't laugh, it's really not funny, but it kind of is because that's how they are in real life. It's always someone else's fault. All this I love you stuff is just lies. Narcissists lie all the time. There's nothing about Gothel's behavior that indicates that she loves Rapunzel. She loves Rapunzel's hair. Rapunzel isn't a person to Gothel. She's just a useful object. She may truthfully want to protect her, I believe that she does. But she wants to protect Rapunzel the way a person might want to protect a valuable tool. You put a tool away in a drawer when you're done using it so it doesn't get damaged. Because if it breaks, then you can't use it anymore. And of course, you always want it to be in the same place so you can find it when you need it, and you might not want anyone else to know its location because then they might steal it. No one who has any real understanding of how love actually works would consider that love. The closest a narcissist can get to loving another person is loving the way that they feel when that person is fulfilling the needs of the narcissist. They don't see that person as a being separate from themselves. A narcissist's love is purely selfish and conditional. Real love is a two-way street, and it involves mutual respect. Narcissists do not love anyone but themselves. And as long as you understand and accept that about them, you can have a very superficial relationship with certain types of narcissists that involves low contact and clearly defined boundaries, which is how I am with my mom. I broke the trauma bond I had with her by going no contact and mourning her like she was dead. So for me, interacting with her in a very limited capacity is pretty easy. If I talk to her, it's usually on the phone, and if I have to see her in person for some reason, I sit all the way across the room. I don't let her touch me, I don't tell her anything personal about myself. And if she starts prying, I just steer the conversation back towards her. I gray rock my way through any interaction I have with her, which means I don't react emotionally to anything she says. And I act pretty disinterested the entire time. And I ignore her attempts at manipulation. She tells me she loves me every time I talk to her, and I just don't respond to it. That doesn't really sound like a relationship though, does it? That's because it's not. Show vulnerability to a narcissist, be open and honest with them, and they will hurt you. The vast majority of people that have escaped from an abusive relationship with a narcissist should just stay no contact forever. I do not recommend reestablishing contact. I hardly even speak to my mother. I'm simply explaining how I deal with her when we do interact. It's not possible to have a healthy relationship with a narcissist, and anyone who says otherwise just flat out doesn't know what they're talking about. And I am, of course, talking about full-blown narcissism, not someone who may have a few narcissistic tendencies, because that's not the same as actually being a narcissist. There's no such thing as a person being kind of narcissistic. That makes as much sense as saying someone is a bit of a psychopath. It's nonsense. A person is either a narcissist or they're not one. Flynn Rider is probably my favorite character in this movie, and he starts out having quite a few negative qualities himself. He's arrogant, selfish, dishonest, manipulative, and untrustworthy. He clearly had an agreement with these guys that they were going to split the money they'd get from selling this crown, but he betrays them. They're clearly not friends because they're smart enough to not trust Flynn with the satchel, but he pretends like he can't believe that they would think so poorly of him. After everything we've been through? You don't trust me? He hands it over and somehow he grabs it while he was climbing on them, and then he won't help them up and he just runs off and leaves them there to get captured. And we see later how the kingdom deals with thieves, so that was pretty messed up of him. And it's arguably his fault they're even being chased because he was the one who alerted the guards to his presence to begin with. It would have been a lot smarter for him to not say anything, unless that was all part of his plan from the start. I'm not sure if he does this out of overconfidence because he likes the added challenge, or if he wants to be chased now because he was planning on betraying these guys all along, and wants them to get captured so he can have the crown for himself. Any way you look at it, Flynn doesn't seem to have many redeeming qualities when he's first introduced. And there are probably some people that don't understand how narcissism actually works that would say that he's narcissistic at this point in the story. I mean, he does have some of the traits, that's all it takes, right? Flynn changes though. He changes a lot over the course of the story. Narcissists don't do that. If anything, they're more likely to get worse over time. Flynn manages to lose Maximus, climbs Rapunzel's tower, and immediately gets knocked out. Rapunzel interrogates him and decides he's not a threat. At this point, Rapunzel realizes that her mother is never going to give her permission to leave the tower, and she isn't confident to leave on her own. Understandable, since she wouldn't have any idea where she's going. She and Flynn strike a deal, or rather Rapunzel kind of blackmails him. If he takes her to see the light, she'll give him back his satchel. And Rapunzel makes the horrible decision, as Flynn puts it, to trust him, and follow her dream to see the floating lights. She finds the courage to defy her mother, and steps outside the tower for the first time. Kinda brings new meaning to the phrase, touch grass. Rapunzel goes back and forth between being ecstatic over leaving the tower and wallowing in guilt and self-loathing over how hurt her mother will supposedly be if she finds out what Rapunzel has done. Flynn watches all of this and eventually approaches her. He can see that she's upset. She's not exactly being subtle about it. Her distress is pretty obvious to anyone with basic observational skills. No emotional empathy is required for him or anyone to understand that she's hurting. He does not feel bad for her, but he still understands through cognitive empathy that she's upset and that she feels guilty and conflicted, and he decides to use this information to manipulate her for his own benefit. Flynn says, "I can't help but notice that you seem at war with yourself. Let me ease your conscience. A little rebellion is good, healthy even. Does your mother deserve it? No. Would this break her heart and crush her soul? Of course. But you've just got to do it." And then he just keeps on trying to make her feel worse, and pretends like he's doing her a favor by taking her back to the tower so they can both supposedly get what they want. I get back my satchel, and you get back a mother-daughter relationship based on mutual trust. She pushes back, and he immediately drops the act in frustration. What's it gonna take to get my satchel back? This dude cracks me up. And then he does the same thing again when he notices how terrified she is at the thought of encountering ruffians or thugs. And he takes her to this bar with an incredibly misleading name in an attempt to scare her into giving up. He knew that he was guilt-tripping her earlier. That was his intention, and he knows that he's scaring her here. Is Flynn's behavior cruel? I don't know, that's a bit melodramatic. They're not friends, they don't even know each other, and she did take his satchel. The crown doesn't belong to him, he stole it, it actually belongs to her, but neither of them know that at this point. But anyway, even though he's arguably being a manipulative jerk for purely selfish reasons, she's a complete stranger to him. Narcissists do this sort of thing to people that they supposedly love. They intentionally hurt and manipulate people who love and trust them. And to me, that's a very significant difference between Flynn and Gothel right from the start. Flynn's plan backfires and he winds up getting himself into some hot water because these guys want the reward for his capture. Rapunzel intervenes and desperately explains how she's been dreaming her whole life to see the floating lights. Find your humanity, haven't any of you ever had a dream? And apparently these guys aren't that bad, or this guy has a soft spot for a pretty girl or something, because this actually works. They all do in fact have dreams and they sing a song about it. That's Disney for you, I guess. She wins them over and they help her and Flynn escape through this secret passageway. The guards catch up to them and they manage to escape into this cave, but a rock falls in front of it and it starts filling with water. Rapunzel breaks down and apologizes for roping Flynn into all of this. Thinking they're gonna die, Flynn tells her his real name is Eugene. Rapunzel reciprocates by telling him her biggest secret. She has magic hair that glows when she sings. And she uses said magic hair to light up the cave and they find a way out. Eugene cut his hand earlier in the cave and Rapunzel heals him. She explains that her mother told her when she was little people tried to cut her hair to take its power for themselves. A gift like that has to be protected, or so her mother told her. And that's why she never left the tower. Eugene explains how he grew up in an orphanage, and he used to read this book about the adventures of Flynn Rider. Swashbuckling rogue, lady killer, rich beyond all imagination. He modeled himself after this larger-than-life fictional character and left his old self behind. But being poor, he didn't have the means to accomplish any of that honestly, so he became a thief. Don't tell anyone, it could ruin my whole reputation. This romance between them is really sweet. It feels very natural and authentic, more so than most romances I've seen in animated movies. Hell, it's better than a lot of romances I've seen in live action. They just complement each other really well. She's this sheltered, naive girl with an abusive, controlling mother that's never really been allowed to be her own person. She doesn't know who she is or what she really wants or how to even take care of herself because her mother won't allow her to figure those things out. And Eugene decided that he didn't like who he was, so he created the persona Flynn Rider to fulfill his dream of finding a better life. Which at this point he thinks means having lots of money and being alone on an island. He's already worldly and self-sufficient, but he doesn't trust anyone. Hiding his true self gives him a sense of control and protection. Can't get hurt if you never trust anyone. But at the heart of it, neither one of them really has an authentic identity. Neither of them knows who they really are or what they really want, and they kind of figure that out together. It's all very romantic. I suppose it is a bit silly to think that two people could fall in love this fast, but it is a Disney film, and their first date is pretty exciting. They also both survived a life or death situation earlier and bared their souls to one another. It's really not that unbelievable to me that they would at least be very attracted to each other at this point. Eugene is enjoying being in the company of someone who likes him for who he really is. And Rapunzel's realizing that the outside world isn't full of purely selfish, cruel people that only want to use her. She gives Eugene back his satchel and says she isn't scared anymore. Mutual respect and trust. Real love. Eugene notices his old accomplices watching them from the shore, and he decides to give them the crown so they can go their separate ways. But Gothel got to them earlier, and they know about Rapunzel's power. They knock out Eugene and tie him to this boat to make Rapunzel think he's betrayed and abandoned her. But before they can kidnap her, Gothel, who orchestrated all of this, knocks them out and pretends like she was following Rapunzel the whole time out of concern for her well-being. The character of Gothel is really quite vile. The fact that she lies constantly and manipulates Rapunzel purely for her own benefit, and pretends like she cares, makes her even more disgusting than the typical villain to me. I would actually find her far less disgusting if she had revealed her true nature to Rapunzel from the start. The only reason she doesn't do that is because it doesn't benefit her. Everything Gothel does is purely self-serving. There's nothing even remotely complicated about this character, at least not to me. Gothel notices that Rapunzel is upset, and again pretends like she always had Rapunzel's best interests at heart. I tried to warn you, the world is selfish and cruel. Funny you should say that, lady, because those are the two words that immediately come to mind when I think of you. Rapunzel sees that she's been subconsciously painting the sun into her art her whole life, and is hit with a flashback from her childhood. She remembers her parents. She's immediately very assertive when she realizes she's the lost princess, and doesn't even seem to struggle with the realization that Gothel has been lying to her for her entire life. And she doesn't even seem that hurt, she's just angry. I'm the lost princess. You're not my mother, and you were wrong about the world and me. I'll never let you use my hair again. And again, when Rapunzel is trying to reason with Gothel later, she is very logical about it. She skipped all the trauma and confusion and immediately sees Gothel for what she is. She isn't even attempting to appeal to Gothel's heart or humanity. She's just very matter-of-fact about it. Give me what I want and I'll give you what you want. It's almost like a business transaction, which I guess is kind of how you need to deal with narcissists, but she shouldn't really understand that yet. The fact that Gothel isn't really her mother probably does make it a bit easier. It's arguably far worse to know that your abuser is your own flesh and blood mother or father, but to have to accept that they were never apparent to you in any kind of meaningful way. Most of the time, a person raised by a narcissist is going to have to come to terms with the fact that their own parent doesn't love them, and that is deeply wounding, and will often be accompanied with feelings of shame and guilt. The victim will often blame themselves, and they will have to deal with that feeling of betrayal, and to maybe even have an almost existential crisis over it. That's how it was for me. It was incredibly traumatizing to realize that my mother had been lying to me my whole life. She was just using me. I looked back on every supposedly loving moment I'd spent with her, and it was all tainted. None of it was true, it was all lies. She was awful to me the whole time, and I did understand on some level that she was a pretty bad mom. But my mother is a vulnerable narcissist, which is like the most sneaky, subtle kind there is. Very hard to tell that these kinds of people are narcissists. And I had a trauma bond with her, so it was very confusing. It wasn't until I got older and I realized how badly she had damaged me and demanded that she accept responsibility for what she'd done to me that her mask came off completely, and that was when she showed me who she really was. It was almost like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something. There was this period of time where I was like, you're not my mother. My mother would never do this to me. I don't know who or what you are, but you're not my mom. To say it was traumatizing is putting it mildly. When you have such a strong toxic bond with an abusive person, you'll never be free until you give up on the fantasy of them ever changing. As long as you hold on to that delusion, you're a slave. And it hurts to give in to the pain and despair. But when you finally come out of it, it is very liberating, like breaking free from chains. You want me to be the bad guy? Fine, I'm the bad guy. She was always the bad guy, she's just being more obvious about it now. Eugene is on his way to be hanged for his crimes, but he questions the Stabbington brothers as he's passing them, and realizes that Rapunzel is in real danger. Maximus gets those guys from the bar to help him escape, and Eugene races back to the tower. Gothel stabs him and tries to drag Rapunzel away. But Rapunzel struggles and very adamantly says that she'll never stop fighting. She'll never stop trying to get away. But if Gothel lets her heal Eugene, she will go with her and be compliant, just like she was before. Gothel agrees and chains Eugene up so he can't follow them, and Rapunzel tries to heal him, but he won't let her. He understands how awful her life will be. The love of a narcissist is poison. To have to live with the narcissist and be a slave to their cruel, selfish love, and be chained to them forever, is a fate worse than death. He knows that, and he's not gonna let it happen. Narcissists drain and exploit the people around them to support their fragile egos. They have an insatiable need for attention and validation, and being in a close relationship with a narcissist means they expect you to fill their supply. In real life, a narcissist having lost their supply would just find another source. But Gothel has no other source of supply aside from Rapunzel, so without her, Gothel withers away like the decrepit parasite she is. Now look, she's evil. That's already been established. She tried to kill Eugene and she was going to keep Rapunzel imprisoned and just use her forever. It doesn't matter that Rapunzel wouldn't have literally been in chains. She still would have been a slave. That would have been a horrible existence for Rapunzel. I enjoy seeing Gothel be defeated. And dare I say I even find it amusing. She's awful and she gets what she deserves. If I can't laugh at this fictional character in this fictional story dying without being a bad person or whatever, then I guess I'm just not that good of a person and I don't care. It's funny.
Oh, mercy.
Okay, now that I'm done with that, I think this scene may have made me cry when I watched it originally. It's pretty sad. She was willing to sacrifice her freedom and live in misery forever to save him, and he was willing to die for her. If they weren't in love before, they sure as hell are now. Rapunzel sings the incantation to comfort herself and mourn Eugene's death. She knows the power won't work anymore. In the original fairy tale, Rapunzel's hair isn't magic, but she does cure her prince's blindness with her tears. So whether you think this Deus Ex Machina power that she suddenly has is contrived or not, it isn't actually coming out of nowhere, it's based on the original story. Gothel is dead, Eugene is healed, he returns her to her kingdom where she's reunited with her birth parents, and they all get their happily ever after. I really do like this film, and I don't have much criticism for it. The only thing I can really think to criticize is I think the movie has a little too much slapstick, but that's me being pretty nitpicky because most of it is really funny. Gothel is a pretty accurate depiction of a narcissist, although for her to go as far as she did, there's something else going on with her aside from just narcissism. I don't know if she's supposed to be a malignant narcissist or what, I'm not familiar with that type, but apparently those kinds are also like sociopaths, so they're really dangerous. But they kinda had to amp things up to make her more of a typical villain at the end. And she was also clearly terrified of dying, but no matter how scared she is of death, that doesn't give her the right to enslave someone. She could have tried asking nicely and being honest instead of being a manipulative harpy that tried to kill Rapunzel's boyfriend. There was never any compromise with Gothel, it was always just pure obedience or slavery. The idea behind Gothel is that she was an awful person the whole time. She was just hiding it better in the beginning, and that is how narcissistic relationships work in real life. Narcissists abuse anyone close to them no matter how you behave. But if you're more compliant, the abuse will be more subtle, and it might take longer for the victim to truly understand how unhealthy the relationship is. Open defiance causes narcissistic rage. The movie doesn't really get into the trauma that Rapunzel would have from having a mother like this, but I wouldn't expect them to. Realistically, Rapunzel probably would have had a trauma bond with Gothel, whether that woman was her real mother or not. And in real life, obviously a person isn't typically going to escape from an abusive parent and immediately find the love of their life and realize, oh, my abuser wasn't even my real parent, and now they're dead so the trauma bond's broken, and actually I found my real parents and they're super rich and now so am I. It's a very fairy tale ending, with everything being wrapped up in a little bow. The reason I didn't like the idea of Reagan running away with her supposed Prince Charming that she really didn't even seem to have that much in common with, was because that wouldn't have fit the already fairly serious established tone of the show. Yeah, there's wacky stuff going on with the conspiracy theory stuff, but they always took the emotional abuse aspect of the story and her complicated relationship with her dad pretty seriously. So to me, Reagan magically having an instant fairy tale ending without really addressing her dealing with her trauma and having time to figure out what she really wants to do with her life would have been incredibly childish. That would have ruined the whole show for me. And she works for the shadow government. That's literally what the show's about. I really don't understand why anyone was disappointed that she didn't want to delete her memories and leave her whole life behind and run away with some guy she just met. And then what? The show would have just been over, or we would have followed the adventures of her and Ron getting married and having kids? That would have been incredibly lame. I'm sure Reagan, Brett, and Rand would have eventually had a fairly happy ending if the show hadn't been cancelled. It just would have been dealt with in a more mature way, over a more realistic span of time. But anyway, that's the difference between an adult animated comedy and a Disney film. Tangled acknowledged the trauma bond a bit here, and they also addressed the guilt and shame that victims of abuse often struggle with. Basically, they acknowledged the effects of emotional abuse in a way that was appropriate for a younger audience. I don't have any issue with Tangled ending the way that it does. It's a Disney movie, and sometimes it's just nice to watch something with a happy ending. I have heard some people say this movie was kind of like an awakening for them because Gothel reminded them of their own mother, and it kind of made them start questioning things. The funny thing is, I don't remember thinking that Gothel reminded me of my mom at all when I watched this movie the first time. I knew Gothel was evil, I never thought she wasn't, and I never thought she loved Rapunzel, but she didn't remind me of my mother. I hadn't fully accepted that my mother was never going to change at that point, though, and my mom is a vulnerable narcissist. Not all narcissists are as obvious as Tomiko and Gothel, which is why, to me, their narcissism seems exaggerated. Although, the way she acts here does remind me of my mom. The fake empathy and concern, my mom's really good at that. And this kind of backhanded compliment is pretty familiar as well. My mom did that a lot. She would compliment and criticize me in the same breath. And she was always very dismissive of my feelings. And if I pushed back against it all, she would gaslight me. Oh, quit being so sensitive. Or her favorite, that never happened, you're imagining things. But yeah, if either Tomiko or Gothel remind you of someone you're close to in real life, that's a red flag in my opinion. And you might want to do some research on narcissism because the sooner you know what you're dealing with, the better off you're going to be. I used to be kind of disappointed that they never made a sequel to this movie, but it's been a long time since I've seen a sequel that I thought was as good as the original, and Disney has been making some pretty not-so-great films for a while now. So I would prefer that they leave this property alone. It's pretty old, so I don't think there's much danger of Disney trying to make a sequel at this point, or at least I hope there isn't. Anyway, that's it. Please like and subscribe or dislike it if you hated the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.